Okay, good morning, everyone. And in the first video, what we talked about, the basics of Pandas. So we're going to expand on doing that. And we're going to look at the conditions, a little bit more about the condition statement. It might be repeated. And then we will talk about doing some calculations, how to look at certain part of the data, and how to change the index of your data frames. So if we're going to look at, if we go to your Azure notebook and then open the project that we were working on before, and we had one called Pandas, so in the pandas.python. In the first video, it might be a different name, but it's the same thing. So continue what you've done before. So we are in notebook called Pandas. So this is our notebook. Since I have not ran this from before, and this is what happened with you too. Now, everything that you see here is all data. So you will have to rerun all the cells again. Now, how do you rerun all the cells again? You run all the cells by clicking on this double arrow, all right? So what will this give you? It says restart the kernel. The kernel is the server, the program in the background that runs all these cells, okay? It's on the server, Microsoft server. So when we click on restart, all this stuff, all these cells now in a minute will disappear. These numbers will disappear and start running cell by cell, okay? So we're done with importing Pandas. We're gonna read the file, we read the file, we display some of the data in the file. So this is completed, this is completed. Here's the data after we skipped some rows. And here is we looked at the bottom of the data frame. If we looked at the values in column test 1, we display some statistics of column 1, test 1. Here we'll give you the min, we'll give you the max. Here we looked at certain rows in the column, in the data frame. So we say we want 5 to 10. We said here in this one, we say, give me all the students that scored less than 14 on the first exam. Here it says, give me all the students that scored more than the average on the first exam. And now we have another cells that we're going to do. Here's what we're going to do, all right? The first thing we're going to do, we're going to say display all the student record that scored more than the average on test 1 and test 2. So here, when we have a compound condition, you will use either or and. And since this one, it says and for both exams, so we will use the and. So what we do, we say, there's two ways to do this. You can get the average first, store it, and then you can use it in your condition. Or you can just use the average in your condition. So I'm going to define two variables. So I'm going to call average 1. Average 1 equal data 2 is my data frame that we've been working with. And then I'm going to say test 1, the column that I want to get the average for, and then give me the mean. So that will give me the mean of the first average. Then I will get average 2, and then give me, again, data 2, and give me the mean. And that will give me the mean for the second average, for the second exam. So now I got the average of both test 1 and test 2. Now I can use it in my program, in my if statement. So what is the condition? The condition goes like this: data 2, and then we put bracket, all right? And the way I like to do it, I will put these brackets like this. I'll put this bracket like this because I have two conditions. And then I will put whatever I want in the middle. So if it's an and, I will put the and. If it's an or, I will put the or. Since they have to score on both exams more than the average, so I will put the and sign in between these two conditions. Now I'll put the condition in each one of them. What's the first condition? I will put the name of the column, which is data 2, test 1. This is the name of the column that I am comparing, right? So this is my column name that I'm comparing. To what? We're comparing it that it has to be greater than the average. What is the average for test 1? We calculated it here. So it's called average, AVG1. So I'm going to say AVG1 is my average. Then I can do the same thing with the second condition. So we're done with the first condition. I'll do the same thing with the second condition. So the second condition goes like this. Same stuff. Data 2. And then I will put the name of the column that I'm comparing. Here it's called test 2 instead of test 1. And again, the condition, it has to be greater than the average. All right? So we're done with this condition. Now, you can use the same thing to do many things, different combinations. Scored less than the average on the first test, scored than the average in the second test, more than the average on the first test. Sorry, less than the average on the first test, but improved on the second test to see if their grades changed. So one is less than the average, the other one is greater than the average. You can do all of that. Now, I'm going to run this and see what we get. Test 1. The column name is missing, right? So I'm going to put test 1 here, and then we will run it. Thank you. So here, if you look that all the students that you got here, they have to, the average was about 16.39 on both exams. So all the values that you get here is greater than 16, yeah, on those test 1 and test 2. So that's how you use and. Okay, if you want to use or, all you have to do, you just use the word or you can just put the bar, okay, and then this one will give you the or, which is the above the division or the slash. All right, or you can type in or. Okay, so if you do that, no, or doesn't like it, so it is actually, it has to be the bar. All right, like this or this. Okay, so that's how you join conditions, multiple conditions. One thing to say though, what if you want to compare string values? What if you want to compare string value? If you're looking for a particular ID, for example, like this, right? I want the ID for this, I want the data for this ID. How do we do that? We do it this way. I'm going to create another cell here, all right? So I'm going to add another cell, and I'm going to say display data for student. We'll just pick any student. So, okay, so I'm going to take this guy, command copy, command V, right? How would we use string in the data, right? So what you do, you say, again, data2 dot test. Now, what are we looking for here? What column are we comparing? ID. We have a different column here. Not test 1, not test 2. So we'll say data2, that's the condition, that ID, not that, ID. Now, because I'm looking for a certain value, I'll have to use the equal sign. Equal what? Equal, because it's text, it's a text field, it's not a number field, we use the quotation around it. So this could be a city, could be Dubai. So instead of numbers, it could be a city, it could be an address, anything like that. So now what are we doing? We're saying that give me, for data2, the data frame, give me, compare this column to this value. Because the student ID only happens 1, we will get only 1 value. All right? So now if I run this, equal in the condition, so when we run this, you will get the student's ID value, right? So when you compare, you can use the greater than, the less than if it's numeric, also for string, but typically for string values, we use the equals. So here, it will give you the information for a particular row, all right? Okay, so that's related to conditions. This is regarding conditions. All right, in the next cell, what we're going to do, we're going to display all rows between 5 and 10, and all the columns between test 1 and test 2. Now, if you notice, we have here's test 1, here is test 2. So if I say all the columns between test 1 and test 2, what you will get? You will get information for test 1, you will get information for test 2, for project, you get information for test 2. So how do we do that? There's two ways, there's several ways, but there's one way that is common. We will use something called the lock function. We say data2 dot lock. This location function has two parameters. The first parameter is related to the column rows. The second parameter is related to the columns. So when we say the columns, I want rows between 5 and 10, so I would say 5. And the range usually is, in Pandas, is colon. So I'll put the colon, and then I will put the 10. So that's for the first value. The second value is separated by comma, and the next value is the rows that you're looking for. And the rows that we're looking for, because they are strings, we will put test1 colon test2. So what happens now, it will give me all the rows between 5 and 10, and all the columns between test 1 and test 2, which are test 1, project, and test 2. So now if we run this, you will get subset of their data, right? Now, this example might not make sense, but as you do more use cases, you'll find out that sometimes you want to look at certain part of the data, and this is how you look at certain part of the data. So when we use range, or we can use range for the row, we can use range for the columns. Sometimes you want all the rows but for certain columns. So I can take the same example that I've done before. I'm gonna do command copy, and notice the difference here. If I want all the rows between test 1 and test 2, all I have to do, remove the row ranges. So now it says, okay, for the first parameter, you're getting all the rows. The second parameter, you're still looking at ranges of columns between test 1 and test 2. Now, if I run it, you'll get all the rows for test 1, project, and test 2. All right? So that's how you can slice data between and look at certain rows and certain columns. The last scenario related to this, what if you were looking at particular rows and particular columns, not in a range? What you can do the same. So for example, this problem says, I want only rows between 5 and 7. I want rows 5, 7, and 9 for columns test 1 and test 2. How do we do this? I'm gonna copy and paste the same data that we had, but now I'm not going to use range. I'm going to use subsets. And then if you want to look at subsets, we will put them in like a brackets, okay, a list. So for example, I'm looking at row 5, 7, 9. So this will give you only these rows, whatever rows you list in these between these square brackets. And the columns, the same way. I'm going to put them in a list, and I'm going to separate them with columns, so with comma. So there's a problem here because we're missing comma. I'm not going to use the range operator anymore, and I'm looking at rows 5, 7, and 9 for column test 1 and column test 2 only. We're not using the range operator anymore. Now, if we run this, watch what will happen. We only got rows 5, 7, and 9, and then the columns that I stated, test 1 and test 2. So far, okay? I'm going to pause for a minute to see if you have any questions. The second problem that we have, sometimes you want to rename columns. Why do you rename columns? You rename columns, maybe the column name doesn't make sense, maybe it's too long, maybe for whatever reason, all right? So you can change the column names, and then we use commands that related to changing columns, which is basically renaming a column. So the syntax is like this. You say data2, that's the name of our data frame, dot rename. What are we renaming? Renaming, this is my function. This is the function that we're going to use to rename the data. What are we renaming? We're renaming the columns. So I'm going to say columns, that's the keyword, equal. Now, when you rename column, it is like pair values, value pairs. That means that you will put the name of the column and what is the new value. The name of the column and what is the new value, the new name. And the way you do it, we're going to do only for test 1. So you say rename column. What are we renaming? We will put the name that what I want to rename is test 1 with the new name. How do you put the new name? You will put the new name like this, and then you give it a name. In this case, we called it T1. All right. So this one will rename column test 1 and test 2, test 1 to T1. Now watch what happens if I run it. It will give you the data. It changed the test 1 to T1, but it actually, the changes took place only in that cell. What do I mean by that? I'll explain what do I mean by that. I'm going to add another cell here before this. And then I'm going to show you the result. Watch what happens. If I say data2 dot head, I'm just going to display one record, and I'm going to run it. Notice it still says test 1, but here it says test T1, and we renamed it. So what happened? There's a command that called, there's another parameter for this function rename. It's called Inplace. If this function is omitted, or this parameter is omitted, the change takes only in that cell. That means when I renamed it, it only renamed it in that cell. After that point, it goes back to whatever it is. So if I want to change it and keep the change, the name change to T1, we have to add this parameter called Inplace. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy this guy here, command copy, and I'm going to add it in here in this cell, and I'll show you the difference. So now if I put comma Inplace equal true, true is capital T. Now, when I run this command, column test 1 will be changed to T1 from this point onward. All right, so every time we reference T1 now, test 1 now we'll have to use the new name, which is T1. Now watch what happens. If I run it, it doesn't give you the result. But if I say if I add another cell after this and repeat the same thing, which is data2 dot head, and then I'm going to put 1 here. Watch what happens. If I run it, Notice now it's changed the name to T1. So if I have another equation, if I want to do sorting, if I want to do anything for that test one, now I'll have to use T1 from now on. All right? So that is related to column. What if we want to rename more column? What do? Simple. All you do, you put comma, and then, for example, you want to put test 2, but we will get an error here because I already renamed this one to T1. So it will look for T1 and it's not there. All right? But I'm going to show you the example. If you want to rename another column, what do? You will put same thing, but separated by comma, and then we put T2. Right? So now I'm renaming 2 columns, test 1 and test 2. First one will be T1, second one will be T2. But because I ran this already, if I change this one to T1, test 1, it would look for this test 1 and it will not find it. You will get an error. So I'm not going to run this. All right? Actually, I'll delete it. Okay. What if you want to add extra column? Sometimes in your data frames, you want to do some calculations. You want to do average. You want to add another column. What do? In this problem, we're saying create a new column called extra. So, and assign a value and assign 2 to that column. How do we do that? First of all, we don't have a column called extra. So all you have to do, you put test data 2 and the new column name that you want. So for example, we called it extra. I'm going to say extra like this, and then assign 2 to it. So if I say equal to, like that, sorry, I'm on the wrong guy, the wrong cell. Equal to, now what happens now, it will add this column extra to the data frame, and all the cells will have, all the rows will have this value in it. So if I do run, watch what happens. And I run this again, you'll notice that we have a new column called extra. Well, that was not there. All right? From this point onward, you can use this column in your calculations. So for example, if I want to add, add this column, this value, to another value, how do I do that? I'm going to add another cell here. I'm going to say here, give an extra, give every student an extra 2 points on the final exam. I'm being generous, right? Only 2, yeah. Well, it's out of 25, so 2 makes a big difference. It's almost like 10%. So what happens? So now, how do we add it? Now, if I create another, I can create another column, or I can add it to the existing column. But if I add it to the existing columns, the values are gone, okay? So will be replaced. But just to show you, so if I say data 2, right? Final exam. Notice the final exam has a space in the column name. Equal data 2, final exam, space exam, and the spelling has to be the same. Plus what? Plus the extra. I could have put the 2, but I want to show you how we use this new column. The new column that we created, it's called extra. So if I say data 2 and then extra, what will happen now, it will take, and I'm going to show you the result. Notice the result. I'm going to use the head command so you can see the result. Notice it's, let's look at the first one. It was 24 right now. So I'm going to say data 2, and then I'm going to say head, and then just display one column, one row, right? So it will take the final exam old value, the new value will be the old value of the final exam plus the column value that you have in the extra column. So now if I run this guy, you will get, remember it was what? 24. Now what is it? 26. Yeah. Let me pause this for a minute. All right, so the recording was paused, so I'm going to repeat some of the stuff that we did. All right. So we talked about renaming columns. How do you rename columns? You can rename columns using the columns rename, the command rename. So you'll put the name of the data frame, the column, the command rename, and then you will put the function. And then the function requires you put the column name, the parameters, and then the old name with the new name. So when we do this, it will actually change column 1, test 1 to T1. All right? But the problem with that is that when you just do this, it only changes it in this cell. So the name actually still test 1 outside this cell. So if we go down and then display the result, just put another cell and then display the data frame again, you will notice that column still test 1, right? So in order to solve this problem and then change the name and keep the name changed, we use another parameter for this function. So here's my function again, data2 dot rename, and then I will put the column name that I want to change, test1, and T1 in place equal to true. All right? And the other, if we have multiple columns that we want to change, you can actually do this. You can say comma, and then you will put test2, and then what do you want to change it to? T2. Now, I'm not going to do this because it's already ran. So if I run this again, it will give me an error because test1 is already changed. So we will use another parameter here called Inplace equal to true. The Inplace equal to true, it changes the column name from now on, and it stays T1. And to test that, so I have another command called data2.head, and it displays the result. All right? So that's related to renaming columns. You can add another column that does not exist in your data frame. And by adding another column that does not exist in the data frame, all you have to do is that you put the name of the data frame and the name of the column that you want to add. So we did not have a column called extra. In this problem, I'm going to add a new column and I'm going to call it extra. So all I have to do, you name the column extra like this, then we put the name of the data frame, and extra is the name of the column, equal to 2. So now when we display the data frame, you will notice that you have a new column called extra. And that is the value of that column is 2 because I assigned it to 2, right? You can add any other column that you want. You can also change an existing column value. For example, in this case, I'm being generous a little bit, we're adding 2 points to the final exam. So we take the old column value, sorry, the column value that we want to change. In this case, it's called final exam, and we have a space in the final exam, so it has to be the same. And then we change it. We change it to what? We change it to the old value in the final exam with the extra column value. So whatever column that I created, I can use it in my calculations from now on. And then we do what? We display the results to show you that are actually taken place. So I only displayed the first column. So it was 24. When we ran this, notice it became 26. Yeah. All right. I'm going to pause. You guys can go to break. And then after that, I'll show you how we calculate the average of 2 tests. All right. Yeah, let's see you. Go for a break. Okay, so that what we did is that we added 2 to the final exam. What if you want to do a little bit more complex? You want to use an equation to calculate the average of test 1 and test 2, for example, and put it in a new column called test average. So what do you do? For example, I'm going to add another cell here. I'm going to say this is test average. Okay, calculate the average of test 1 and test 2 in a new column called average, test average, like that. So to add a new column, we'll have to use the name of this. So we'll say test average data 2, and then we will say test average, like that. And then we put the equation. What is the equation? The average is the sum divided by the count. So the sum of the 2 columns, it's called data 2. And then I want to put the column here in a minute, plus data 2, and then test 2 divided by 2. Now I left this intentional. What is test 1 now? T1, right? Because we named it as T1. So I'll have to put T1 from this point onward instead of test 1. All right, and then if you want to display the result, again, you just put data 2 dot head. Let's see the result. So if I run it, you'll notice that I have a new column called test average, and it's the sum of test 1, test 2 divided by 2. All right. So that is related to columns, calculation. All right. This will be the end of the first video. The next video, I'm going to show you how we sort the data, change the index and sorting the data. Okay.